Hi friends, welcome to Lilalicious. I'm Regina and today I'm going to show you how to make sauerkraut. Sauerkraut, or as we say in German, Sauerkraut, is lacto-fermented cabbage. Sauerkraut is one of the easiest fermented foods you can make at home. It's one of the 4 fermented foods I regularly make for my family. The other 3 I make are kombucha, yogurt, and sourdough bread. All 3 of these actually need a SCOBY or a starter of sorts, whereas sauerkraut you can make from just shredded cabbage and salt at its simplest. And while it's definitely easier to make sauerkraut if you have a fermentation crock, like this one, it is not an absolute requirement. I just got this one last year. Until then, I made do with large bowls or mason jars, and it works just as well. To get started, we need a large head of cabbage, about a kilo or 2.2 pounds. Or just a bit more than that, since we're going to remove a couple of the outside layers of our head of cabbage. I haven't been too successful growing my own cabbage yet, so I always use store-bought. With organic cabbage, I only remove and discard 1 layer. With conventional cabbage, I remove at least 2 layers. And then 1 more leaf that we're going to use later to cover our sauerkraut. So all these outer layers get discarded, or if you have chickens, feed it to them. And a couple of pieces to cover the sauerkraut later. Now let's cut the cabbage in half. And you can see in the middle now there is a bit of a stalk or a stem part. Let's cut that out too. You can either kind of cut this wedge out or quarter the cabbage first and then just slice it off. But don't discard this, we can actually use it if you want to. I'm going to show you how a little bit later. So now it's time to slice our cabbage. It's easiest to do that in quarters. And you can use a large, sharp chef's knife and just simply slice it thinly on your cutting board. And you'll end up with these beautiful thin shreds of cabbage. But it does take a while, especially if you double the recipe. So I like to speed up the process using the slicing disc, not the grating disc, of my food processor. Cut those quarter wedges in half again. And we're going to align the cabbage pieces so that the blade slices across in a similar way as a knife's blade would. Push the cabbage through the feeding tube of your food processor, and in just seconds it will all be processed and shredded. Sometimes a few larger pieces make it through, so I usually pick those out and we'll deal with them in a bit. Sometimes I just snack on them. And now let's layer our cabbage in a large bowl. Add a bit of cabbage and then a bit of salt. We need about 20 grams or 1 heaping tablespoon of salt for 1 kilo or 2.2 pounds of cabbage. I find it's easier to distribute the salt among the cabbage by layering it into the bowl. A layer of cabbage, a little bit of salt, and keep going until you're done with all the salt and cabbage. Now let the salt and cabbage mixture sit for about 10 to 30 minutes. The salt will naturally start to draw out the water from the cabbage, so processing it later will be easier. And while the cabbage mixture is sitting, we can deal with our optional ingredients. I like to add 1 carrot or 2 of these small ones from my garden. And when I end up with some carrot greens, I never discard them. I have a recipe for carrot green pesto on my side. And also recently I figured out these carrot greens make delicious homemade vegetable broth. Let me know if you're interested in the recipe and I will maybe post that in the future. The carrot needs to be grated so it's similar in size to the shredded cabbage. You can do this with your box grater, the large side works well. Or if you already have your food processor out, switch to the grating blade and that will take care of the carrot in a couple of seconds. Here you can see it's just a small amount of carrot. I like to add it because that's the way how my mom always made it, and I find it gives the sauerkraut a nice, like deeper yellow color as opposed to just a pale green. This is optional. Don't add too much carrot as that can soften the sauerkraut too much. Just 1 or 2 small ones is enough. And while you're already grating the carrot, you can do the same thing with the cabbage core. Either use the box grater or food processor grating blade and process the core of the cabbage into like finer shredded grades. You could simply discard it, but if it's grated finely, it blends into the sauerkraut perfectly. And now remember the larger pieces of cabbage that somehow made it through the food processor, then I just kind of layer them up and also quickly shred those to add to the big batch in a bit. Now we can add all our additional ingredients to the bowl of cabbage and salt. Some carrot, some grated cores, or some bigger leaves that were hand sliced. At this point, you can also add some caraway seeds. For some people, this is essential to sauerkraut. I didn't grow up that way and I don't care for the flavor as much, so I don't add it, but if you like, add 2 teaspoons for this amount of cabbage. Now it's time to process all the shredded cabbage. You can use a potato masher, but I find that kind of takes a long time and it's not that easy. You can also use a tamper. There's special fermentation tampers for this purpose, but I find that the handle of a wooden spoon works just as well. However, my preferred method of making sauerkraut is hand massaging it. You can use a glove. I'm doing it this time just for demonstration purposes, but honestly, when it's just for my family at home, I just do it with a thoroughly washed hand and massage the cabbage until it's starting to release a lot of liquid. You will also see that the color changes. Instead of being opaque and white greenish, it starts to become translucent, and if you check the bottom, you will see that quite a bit of liquid has released. Once the cabbage looks like this, it's time to transfer it into the container you're going to ferment your sauerkraut in. I have this special fermentation crock. It is designed for this specific purpose, but I've only had it for the last year or so, and if you don't have one, you can also just use large mason jars. I have quart-sized ones here. If you have a bigger one, that's even better. Press down the cabbage so it nicely fills out the entire container, and then press down even more so that the liquid emerges to the top and all of the shredded cabbage is under the liquid. And now it's time for the reserved cabbage leaves from earlier. Rip a piece about the size of the surface and push it down on top as well. This will help to keep the cabbage submerged in the brining liquid. And then we need a fermentation weight. There's some specifically made weights for this purpose you can buy online. They're made from glass usually, but you can also find something similar that you may already have in your kitchen. I'm using this small glass jar filled with water and add it on top of the cabbage. In my fermentation crock, there is some specially made weights that are specially designed to lay on top of the sauerkraut. And fermentation crocks also have this rim in the lid you can see here. Filling this rim with water will make the lid sit tightly on our jar to prevent any contamination from dust, debris, or fruit flies. Now find a cool, dry place in your kitchen and let the sauerkraut ferment for 1 to 4 weeks at room temperature. In the first week, the lactic acid bacteria are most active, and you will see that some bubbles form in your sauerkraut, maybe even a little bit of foam on top, and this may cause some of the cabbage to rise up above the liquid. So in the first week, check in on your sauerkraut daily and push down on the weights to keep all of the cabbage submerged under the brining liquid. If not, it may actually start to rot or turn moldy. After the first week, the bubbling activity usually starts to slow down significantly, and you may not have to do this anymore. Also, after the first week of fermentation, you can start testing to see if the sauerkraut has reached your desired level of fermentation. You can taste a little bit to check the tanginess level. I actually like sauerkraut that it has been fermented for 1 week, as I don't like too much tanginess and I still like it to have quite a bit of crunch. But depending on your taste preferences and the room temperature in your kitchen, this may take up to 4 weeks. When the sauerkraut is finished to your desired levels, you can now store it in the fridge. If you fermented your sauerkraut in a fermentation crock, you can transfer it to some mason jars or other sealable containers. But if you already fermented it in mason jars, you can just transfer them to the fridge. And the sauerkraut is ready to be enjoyed anytime you feel like it. Try to use it up within the next 4 to 6 months. A serving as small as 2 tablespoons of sauerkraut per day provides you with a similar range of probiotic goodness as a probiotic supplement does. And this is how easy it is to make sauerkraut. It takes a little bit of time, a week at a minimum, but it's definitely not difficult or hard by any means. Thank you so much for watching this video and following along. I hope you're going to try your own homemade sauerkraut now. If you do, let me know in the comments. I love to hear from you guys. And be sure to like and share this video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you soon with another delicious recipe. Bye for now.